The United States spans 3.794 million square miles of diverse territory, but scattered across this vast landscape are geographic oddities that would make any traveler question exactly how they came to exist. There's a piece of Minnesota that you literally cannot reach without leaving the United States first. There's an American state that's actually closer to Africa than Florida is. These aren't random trivia facts, they're real geographic mysteries that exist across America today, each one revealing how historical accidents, natural forces, and surveying errors created some of the strangest boundaries on Earth. The reasons these places exist will completely change how you think about US geography. The American territory you can't reach by car. Picture this scenario. You're a Minnesota resident who wants to visit the northernmost part of your own state, but you need to pack your passport because you literally cannot get there without crossing into Canada first. This isn't some bureaucratic nightmare or travel mix-up. It's the daily reality for anyone trying to reach the northwest angle, a 621 square mile chunk of Minnesota that dangles from the Canadian border like a geographic afterthought. The northwest angle holds the distinction of being America's northernmost point in the continental United States, yet reaching it requires a 40-mile drive through Manitoba, Canada. This bizarre situation exists because of a monumental surveying error that occurred during the 1783 Treaty of Paris negotiations. The treaty makers based their work on maps that showed Lake of the Woods as a simple oval shape rather than its true irregular form with that distinctive northern projection, trapping American territory on the wrong side of what became the international border. Today, roughly 60 year-round residents call this isolated peninsula home, and they've developed unique strategies for navigating the international border that separates them from the rest of America. Residents receive special documentation allowing them to cross through Canada for essential needs like grocery shopping, medical appointments, and school attendance. The nearest American hospital sits 80 miles away through Canadian territory, while the closest grocery store requires the same international journey. Customs enforcement in this remote location operates on an honor system during certain hours, with residents checking in at an unmanned border station using video phones. One local resident described the surreal experience of picking up the phone at the unstaffed crossing and speaking to a border agent hundreds of miles away, explaining their reason for crossing while staring at an empty booth. The area has transformed from a forgotten territorial accident into a destination for serious anglers and hunters who appreciate its pristine wilderness and world-class fishing opportunities on Lake of the Woods. Border security concerns have intensified in recent years, leading to upgraded surveillance technology and more stringent crossing procedures, but residents have adapted to these changes while maintaining their unique lifestyle. The northwest angle represents more than just a cartographic curiosity. It demonstrates how 18th century surveying mistakes continue to shape modern American geography, creating communities that exist in a constant state of international limbo. What would you do if your nearest hospital lay in another country? This question becomes even more complex when you discover places where the very ground beneath your feet seems to belong to the wrong state entirely. The Iowa town that shouldn't exist. Looking at a map of the Omaha metropolitan area, you'll notice something that doesn't make sense. There's a town called Carter Lake that sits completely surrounded by Nebraska, yet every official document confirms it belongs to Iowa. This geographic puzzle exists because of a single catastrophic flood in 1877 that permanently altered the Missouri River's path, stranding an entire community on the wrong side of what should have been a natural state boundary. The Missouri River originally flowed in a wide curve that kept Carter Lake firmly connected to Iowa's mainland. When the 1877 flood struck, it carved a new channel that cut straight through the river's bend, moving the main flow 1.25 miles southeast and creating an oxbow lake where the old riverbed used to run. This oxbow lake became Carter Lake, and the town that grew up around it found itself geographically isolated from the rest of Iowa, completely surrounded by Nebraska territory. The resulting legal battle between Iowa and Nebraska reached the Supreme Court in 1892, where justices faced an unprecedented question about river boundaries and state jurisdiction. The court ruled definitively in Iowa's favor, 1892 Supreme Court ruling, establishing that Carter Lake would remain part of Iowa despite its physical separation. This decision created a crucial legal precedent that departed from the standard rule requiring state boundaries to follow river changes, making Carter Lake a permanent exception to normal boundary law. The town incorporated as a city in July 1930 and quickly became known as a gambling hotspot with minimal law enforcement oversight. One 1930s newspaper headline proclaimed Carter Lake as Nebraska's Sin City in Iowa, capturing the regulatory confusion that entrepreneurs exploited for decades. Today, approximately 3,775 residents navigate the daily complexities of living in Iowa while being completely surrounded by Nebraska. They carry Iowa driver's licenses and vote in Iowa elections, but their mail gets delivered through Omaha postal routes. Emergency services require coordination between two states, with Carter Lake's fire department working closely with Nebraska dispatchers while maintaining Iowa jurisdiction. Law enforcement presents ongoing challenges since Iowa police must technically travel through Nebraska to reach Carter Lake, while Nebraska officers cannot make arrests in Iowa territory. These jurisdictional complications affect everything from property taxes to school district assignments, creating administrative headaches that residents have learned to accept as part of their unique geographic situation. Carter Lake proves that when natural forces reshape the landscape, legal boundaries don't always follow, creating communities that exist as permanent reminders of nature's power to ignore human-drawn lines. But geographic assumptions can be misleading in other ways too, particularly when it comes to measuring distances across vast oceans. America's surprising gateway to Africa. Most Americans would instinctively point to Florida when asked which state sits closest to Africa. The logic seems sound. Florida extends furthest into the Atlantic, boasts a tropical climate, and just feels like it should be America's gateway to the African continent. This assumption turns out to be completely wrong. Maine holds the distinction of being America's closest point to Africa, specifically through Quoddy Head, which sits 3,154 miles from El Jadida, Morocco by Great Circle distance. This measurement beats Florida's closest approach to Africa by over 900 miles, making Maine the clear winner in a geographic contest that surprises nearly everyone who learns about it. The 2025 GPS measurements and satellite mapping technology have confirmed these distances with unprecedented accuracy. Quoddy Head operates as a lighthouse settlement that marks America's easternmost point, a rocky outcrop where the Atlantic Ocean crashes against granite cliffs in conditions that couldn't be more different from Florida's sandy beaches. Picture Maine's harsh, windswept coastline facing Morocco's warm Mediterranean shores. The contrast makes this geographic connection seem almost impossible, yet the Earth's spherical nature creates exactly this counterintuitive relationship. A Maine fisherman recently told researchers his reaction upon learning this fact. "I've been hauling lobster traps my whole life thinking I was about as far from Africa as you could get in America, and now you're telling me I'm closer to Morocco than folks in Miami?" His surprise captures the fundamental way this geographic truth challenges basic assumptions about continental relationships. The lighthouse itself has guided ships through these treacherous waters for generations, serving as both a navigational aid and an unwitting symbol of America's unexpected proximity to North Africa. Ships departing from Maine ports could reach North African destinations faster than vessels leaving from southern ports, giving Maine merchants distinct advantages in Mediterranean trade during the 18th and 19th centuries. Climate change and shifting ocean currents continue to affect these precise measurements, though the fundamental relationship remains unchanged. Rising sea levels and changing ocean temperatures influence exact distances between continental points, but Maine's geographic advantage over Florida persists, regardless of these environmental changes. This geographic fact fundamentally reshapes understanding of America's global position, demonstrating how the Earth's spherical nature creates counterintuitive relationships that flat maps fail to accurately represent. Yet Maine's isolation from Africa pales in comparison to American communities that find themselves cut off from their own country by international borders. The American town cut off by a line. One Point Roberts resident put it bluntly, I need my passport to buy milk. This stark reality defines daily life in Point Roberts, Washington, one of America's most isolated communities, a 5-square-mile peninsula that can only be reached by land through Canada. This geographic anomaly emerged from the 1846 Oregon Treaty, which established the 49th parallel as the international boundary between the United States and British North America. The treaty negotiators drew their straight line across the continent without considering that this arbitrary boundary would slice through the Tawasin Peninsula, leaving the southern tip stranded as American territory completely cut off from the rest of Washington state. The current population of around 1,200 residents faces the extraordinary daily challenge of crossing international borders for basic necessities. Every trip to buy groceries, visit a doctor, or attend work requires passing through Canadian customs and then re-entering the United States. Residents must travel 23 miles north through British Columbia to reach the nearest American territory, making Point Roberts one of the most border-dependent communities in North America. The COVID-19 pandemic transformed these routine border crossings into a crisis, severely limiting access to groceries and healthcare as residents found themselves cut off from essential services. Law enforcement and emergency services face complex jurisdictional challenges in this isolated location. The Whatcom County Sheriff's Office must coordinate with Canadian authorities for any emergency response, while medical emergencies often require transport through international territory to reach appropriate facilities. Fire and ambulance services operate under special agreements that allow rapid border crossings during emergencies, but these arrangements require constant diplomatic maintenance. Point Roberts has evolved from a quiet fishing village into a popular recreational destination, particularly during summer months when visitors arrive for birdwatching and waterfront activities. The area's natural beauty and proximity to Vancouver attracts tourists who can access the peninsula by chartered boat or small aircraft, avoiding the lengthy border crossing routine that residents endure daily. Ongoing debates about the community's future focus on potential solutions to chronic access issues. Discussions include proposals for expedited border crossing procedures, improved infrastructure, and greater recognition of Point Roberts' special circumstances by both American and Canadian governments. Residents have developed remarkable adaptation strategies, obtaining special permits and coordinating with customs officials to maintain their unique lifestyle. Point Roberts represents the unintended consequences of straight-line borders drawn by negotiators who prioritized political simplicity over geographic reality. This community demonstrates how 19th-century diplomatic decisions continue to shape modern American life. But even more confusing situations arise when rivers themselves create the boundaries that trap entire territories in the wrong state. The land that belongs to the wrong state. Deep in the Mississippi River's twisting path lies Kentucky Bend, a 26.9-square-mile piece of Kentucky that finds itself completely surrounded by Missouri and Tennessee. This geographic puzzle exists because the Mississippi River refused to stay in one place, creating what locals call the New Madrid Bend through centuries of meandering that eventually cut off this territory from the rest of Kentucky. The dramatic 1811 to 1812 New Madrid earthquakes accelerated the river's course changes, permanently severing this land from its parent state. These powerful seismic events shifted the Mississippi's flow so dramatically that Kentucky Bend became an island of one state floating in a sea of two others. The river's new path solidified this area's status as an exclave, making it accessible only by traveling through Tennessee or Missouri. 9 residents call this isolated territory home, according to the 2020 census, a population so small it barely registers on most maps. These hardy individuals face the extraordinary challenge of crossing state lines every time they need to reach the rest of Kentucky. The shortest route to Kentucky proper requires a 40-mile journey through Tennessee, making simple tasks like voting or accessing state services into multi-state expeditions. Mail delivery presents ongoing complications since postal workers must navigate Tennessee roads to reach Kentucky addresses. Emergency services operate under complex agreements between 3 states, with ambulances and fire trucks potentially crossing multiple jurisdictions during a single call. Legal jurisdiction becomes particularly murky when crimes or civil disputes involve residents of this geographic orphan. Ongoing confusion about state jurisdiction continues to affect property records and legal proceedings. County officials from 3 states sometimes disagree about which government holds authority over specific issues, creating administrative headaches that residents navigate with patience born from generations of experience. John Hardman Walker's lobbying efforts in the 1890s helped establish clearer administrative procedures for the Bend's unique circumstances. Mark Twain immortalized this geographic oddity in Life on the Mississippi, observing that the Mississippi will always have its own way. No engineering skill can persuade it to do otherwise. His observations about the river's unpredictable nature perfectly captured the forces that created Kentucky Bend. This exclave exemplifies the unpredictable nature of river boundaries, demonstrating how natural forces can override human attempts to create orderly political divisions. Yet sometimes surveyors manage to achieve remarkable precision, creating geographic intersections that represent the opposite extreme of boundary-making accuracy. Where 4 states touch at one point. The Four Corners Monument stands as America's only point where 4 states meet at a single geographic intersection. This precise coordinate represents the convergence of Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico, creating a unique spot where visitors can literally stand in 4 states simultaneously. The monument itself consists of a bronze disc embedded in granite, marking the exact coordinates where these political boundaries intersect. The complex surveying history behind this intersection traces back to the territorial disputes of the 1860s. The initial boundary was drawn after the Compromise of 1850, creating the New Mexico and Utah territories, followed by the Colorado Territory in 1861. The Union's response to the Confederate States of America gaining traction with the Arizona Territory was to create another of the same name, splitting New Mexico along a north-south line. These territorial divisions during rising tensions between the North and South created the foundation for today's Four Corners intersection. The monument continues to attract substantial visitor numbers in 2025, with tourism officials reporting steady increases in annual visits. The site has become a popular destination for families and geography enthusiasts who want to experience this unique geographic phenomenon firsthand. Visitors often pose for photographs while positioning themselves in all 4 states simultaneously, creating a memorable experience that few other locations can offer. Ongoing controversy surrounds the monument's exact location and surveying accuracy. Historical surveying methods used when the boundary was first established have raised questions about the monument's precise coordinates. This debate highlights the complexities of accurately defining geographic boundaries using 19th-century surveying techniques compared to modern GPS technology. The intersection holds deep cultural significance for Native American tribes whose ancestral lands were divided by these state lines. The monument's presence serves as a reminder of the complex history and ongoing relationship between the tribes and the U.S. government, representing how political boundaries can fragment traditional territories that existed long before European settlement. The intersection creates unique legal and jurisdictional challenges requiring cooperation among 4 states. Law enforcement, taxation, and other governmental functions must navigate the complexities of managing an area where multiple state jurisdictions converge at a single point. Modern GPS technology has confirmed the monument's placement within acceptable surveying tolerances, validating the work of 19th-century surveyors who created this precise intersection. Four Corners represents both human precision and geographic ambition, but America's territorial reach extends far beyond the continental United States into remote Pacific waters, where distance creates even more extraordinary geographic relationships. American islands closer to Russia than America. The Aleutian Islands stretch across the North Pacific like a chain of American stepping stones toward Russia, creating one of the most geographically counterintuitive situations in North America. Attu Island, the westernmost point of the United States, sits just 200 miles from Russian territory while remaining over 1,400 miles from anchorage. This means that American citizens living on these remote islands wake up closer to Moscow than to their own state capital. The 2025 population data shows approximately 8,000 residents scattered across the entire Aleutian chain, with military personnel making up a significant portion of this number. These communities face extraordinary challenges governing territory so far from mainland America, requiring specialized supply chains, emergency services, and communication systems that can operate across vast Pacific distances. Every basic necessity must be planned months in advance due to weather-dependent transportation schedules. The islands gained critical importance during World War II when Japan invaded and occupied Attu Island, marking the only time enemy forces controlled American soil during the war. The Battle of Attu became a bloody campaign that highlighted the strategic value of these remote territories and led to permanent military infrastructure development throughout the region. This wartime experience demonstrated how geographic isolation could become a military liability, requiring constant defensive attention. Ongoing geopolitical significance shapes U.S.-Russia relations through the island's proximity to Russian territory. Both nations maintain increased military activity in the region, including naval patrols, aerial surveillance, and advanced military technology deployment. The strategic importance of the Bering Strait and Arctic shipping routes makes these islands crucial monitoring points for international maritime traffic and potential military movements. Climate change poses significant threats to these remote communities through rising temperatures, changing weather patterns, and coastal erosion. Melting glaciers and sea ice contribute to habitat loss and increased storm surges that affect indigenous Aleut populations who depend on traditional fishing, hunting, and gathering practices. Ocean acidification threatens marine ecosystems that support both local communities and wildlife populations. Residents cope with extreme isolation through strong social networks, traditional knowledge, and remarkable self-sufficiency. Communities rely on resource-based industries like fishing, while maintaining mutual support systems that help them survive harsh weather conditions and limited access to outside services. The Aleutian Islands represent America's furthest reach into the Pacific, serving as strategic outposts that demonstrate the country's vast geographic diversity. Yet while these islands showcase America's territorial extremes, some of the most unusual boundaries exist much closer to home, where colonial-era decisions created geometric shapes that defy conventional border logic. The state border that's actually a circle. Delaware possesses America's only circular state boundary, a 12-mile arc that creates the most geometrically unique border in the entire United States. This perfect circle centers on New Castle, Delaware, and forms the boundary between Delaware and Pennsylvania in a way that defies every other state border arrangement across the country. The circular shape stands out dramatically when viewed on maps, appearing as if someone drew it with a compass rather than following natural features or surveying lines. The origins of this unusual boundary trace back to King Charles II's 1681 land grant to William Penn, which gave Penn control over land west of the Delaware River. However, the Duke of York had previously acquired the area from Dutch colonists, creating a territorial conflict that required creative resolution. The circular boundary emerged as a compromise solution, allowing the Duke of York to maintain his exception while establishing clear territorial limits for Penn's new colony. New Castle serves as the center point of this 12-mile circle, giving the small town extraordinary significance in American boundary history. The town's position as the circle center means that every point along Delaware's northern border sits exactly 12 miles from New Castle's courthouse, creating a mathematical precision that no other state boundary can match. This arrangement affects property development and land values throughout the region, as proximity to the circular boundary creates unique zoning and jurisdictional considerations. Delaware's claim to the entire Delaware River creates ongoing disputes with New Jersey that persist in 2025. This claim defies standard water boundary rules, which typically place state boundaries in the middle of rivers rather than granting complete control to one state. The Supreme Court has attempted to resolve these concerns through various rulings, But legal battles continue over river rights and jurisdiction, affecting everything from fishing regulations to shipping traffic. The practical challenges of surveying and maintaining a circular border require specialized techniques and constant monitoring. Unlike straight-line boundaries that can be marked with simple monuments, the circular border demands precise mathematical calculations to ensure accuracy at every point along its 12-mile radius. Delaware has demonstrated remarkable determination in defending its river claims, even requesting National Guard assistance in the early 2000s as a symbolic gesture during particularly intense disputes with New Jersey. This circular boundary represents colonial-era politics that continue affecting modern America, but even Delaware's geometric precision pales in comparison to boundaries that shift with natural forces beyond human control. The border that changes with the weather. The Maryland-Virginia border dispute over the Potomac River represents America's most fluid boundary, literally changing size with every storm that passes through the region. This unusual arrangement grants Maryland ownership of everything up to the low water mark on Virginia's side of the river, creating a boundary that expands and contracts based on precipitation patterns and seasonal water levels. Maryland's territory literally grows during periods of heavy rainfall as the Potomac River swells beyond its normal banks. When spring snowmelt and summer thunderstorms increase water levels, Maryland's boundary moves further inland on the Virginia side, temporarily expanding the state's total area. Conversely, during drought conditions, the low water mark retreats toward the Maryland shore, effectively shrinking the state's territory until the next significant rainfall event. The 2025 climate patterns have intensified these boundary fluctuations through increasingly erratic precipitation cycles. Extended drought periods followed by sudden heavy rainfall events create dramatic swings in water levels that push Maryland's boundary back and forth across Virginia's shoreline. These climate-driven changes occur more frequently and with greater intensity than historical patterns, making the border more volatile than ever before. Property owners and businesses along the river face unique challenges navigating this shifting boundary. Virginia waterfront property owners must contend with Maryland's jurisdiction extending across their shoreline during high water periods. Marina operators, dock owners, and waterfront businesses find themselves subject to Maryland regulations when river levels rise, creating complex legal situations that require expertise in both states' laws. Fishing and boating regulations become particularly complicated since Maryland maintains authority over all river waters regardless of which state the angler or boater launched from. Virginia residents fishing from their own shoreline must follow Maryland fishing licenses and regulations, while boaters crossing the river encounter changing jurisdictional requirements based on current water levels. The historical origins of this unusual water boundary agreement trace back to colonial land grants that awarded Maryland control over the entire Potomac River. These 17th-century agreements prioritized navigation rights and river commerce over the geometric precision that would characterize later boundary arrangements between states. Modern technology now tracks these seasonal boundary changes through sophisticated monitoring systems that measure water levels, precipitation patterns, and shoreline positions in real time. The United States Geological Survey works with state agencies to maintain accurate records of boundary fluctuations, providing essential data for legal proceedings and regulatory enforcement. This weather-dependent border proves that some boundaries cannot be permanently fixed, instead remaining subject to natural forces that reshape political divisions. Yet while weather creates temporary boundary shifts, deeper geological forces work continuously to reshape entire states through movements that occur beneath the surface. The fault line that's reshaping America. The San Andreas Fault operates as the geographic feature actively changing California's shape through constant movement that averages approximately 2 inches per year. This relentless motion gradually shifts the landscape across 800 miles of California terrain, creating one of the most dynamic boundaries on Earth. The fault system extends from the Sultan Sea in Southern California to Cape Mendocino in the north, marking where the Pacific Plate slides past the North American Plate in a process that has continued for millions of years. The 2025 measurements reveal that fault movement continues at its predictable pace, with scientists using advanced GPS technology and interferometric synthetic aperture radar to track displacement patterns across the entire system. These monitoring efforts provide real-time data that helps researchers understand the fault's complex dynamics and assess earthquake risks for surrounding communities. The USGS operates extensive sensor networks that continuously measure ground movement, detecting even millimeter-scale changes in the fault's position. This persistent movement creates significant challenges for property boundaries and land ownership throughout California. Legal definitions of land parcels require periodic adjustments as the slow but steady displacement shifts property lines over time. Surveyors working near the fault must account for ongoing ground movement when establishing new boundaries, while existing property owners face the reality that their land literally moves year after year. Communities built directly on top of this moving geological boundary face extraordinary engineering challenges. Cities, like Hollister and Parkfield, sit astride the fault line, requiring specialized construction techniques and infrastructure design that can accommodate constant ground movement. Buildings must incorporate flexible joints and seismic-resistant materials, while roads and bridges need regular maintenance to address displacement-related damage. The fault's influence extends throughout California's infrastructure systems, affecting everything from water pipelines to urban planning decisions. Water systems require flexible connections and redundant routing to maintain service during seismic events, while city planners must incorporate fault zones into development regulations. The ongoing movement necessitates continuous adaptation of infrastructure and building codes. Long-term implications for California's geographic future include gradual landscape changes that will alter the state's physical boundaries over geological timescales. This fault line represents geography in constant motion, demonstrating how Earth's crustal forces continue reshaping the American landscape through incremental but persistent geological processes. Yet while the San Andreas Fault slowly transforms California through natural forces, other geographic features in the state face rapid transformation through entirely different mechanisms that threaten their very existence. The disappearing sea in the desert. The Sultan Sea operates as California's largest lake, yet this massive body of water continues shrinking at an alarming rate that threatens the entire region's geographic stability. This inland sea stretches across 343 square miles in the Colorado Desert, making it larger than Lake Tahoe, but its boundaries contract visibly each year as water levels drop to historically low points. The sea's retreat exposes thousands of acres of lake bed that were underwater just decades ago. This accidental sea emerged from a catastrophic engineering mistake in 1905 when Colorado River irrigation canals breached their banks during construction. The resulting flood diverted the entire river into the Sultan Basin for 2 years, creating an inland sea where none had existed before. The California Development Company's failed irrigation project unintentionally produced the state's largest water body through what became one of the most expensive engineering disasters in American history. Current 2025 water levels have dropped to 228 feet below sea level, representing a 17-foot decline since 2000. The accelerating shrinkage rate now averages 1.5 feet per year, exposing approximately 10,000 acres of new lake bed annually. This rapid retreat creates a growing ring of exposed sediment that contains concentrated salts, heavy metals, and agricultural chemicals accumulated over decades. The shrinking sea exposes toxic dust that creates severe air quality problems for surrounding communities. Wind patterns carry this contaminated dust across the Coachella Valley, contributing to respiratory illnesses and other health problems in nearby towns. The exposed lakebed contains high concentrations of arsenic, selenium, and other hazardous materials that become airborne particles during dust storms. Wildlife habitats face devastation as the sea's retreat eliminates crucial feeding and nesting areas for over 400 bird species. The Pacific Flyway depends on the Salton Sea as a critical stopover point, but declining water levels destroy the shallow areas where birds traditionally feed. Fish populations crash as increasing salinity levels exceed tolerance thresholds for most species. The massive environmental and public health crisis affects over 650,000 residents living within 30 miles of the sea. Restoration efforts include dust suppression projects, habitat creation, and water importation programs, but funding constraints limit their effectiveness. The estimated cost of comprehensive restoration exceeds $9 billion, creating political battles over resource allocation. This geographic manipulation demonstrates how human interference with natural water systems creates lasting environmental consequences. The Salton Sea's decline reshapes regional boundaries and forces communities to confront the economic costs of environmental disasters. Yet while California watches its largest lake disappear, other parts of America experience the opposite phenomenon as natural forces actively create new territory. America's newest land, Massachusetts, Hawaii's Kilauea volcano, operates as America's only active landmaking factory, continuously creating new territory through lava flows that expand the state's boundaries in real time. This geological powerhouse has added hundreds of acres of fresh land since 2018, with molten rock flowing into the Pacific Ocean and solidifying into permanent additions to American territory. The process represents the only place in the United States where the nation's geography literally grows larger each day. The 2025 measurements reveal that Kilauea's recent activity has generated approximately 875 acres of new land along Hawaii's southeastern coastline. Advanced satellite imaging and drone surveys track this expansion weekly, documenting how lava flows create rocky peninsulas that extend Hawaii's official boundaries into the Pacific. The ongoing volcanic activity continues producing new land at rates that vary based on eruption intensity and lava flow patterns. Legal complexities surrounding ownership of newly formed land create unprecedented challenges for property law. State jurisdiction over fresh volcanic territory involves intricate interpretations of existing property regulations and the establishment of new precedents for land ownership. These legal battles typically involve state authorities, private landowners, and native Hawaiian communities who hold cultural claims to traditional territories expanded by volcanic activity. Property boundaries require constant adjustment as lava flows extend existing coastlines and create entirely new geographic features. Surveyors must repeatedly remeasure and redefine property lines as volcanic activity alters the landscape, creating situations where land parcels grow without any human intervention. These boundary changes affect everything from taxation to development rights in areas where new land appears. Environmental impacts from rapid land formation create complex ecological situations that affect established ecosystems while simultaneously generating opportunities for new habitats. The volcanic process destroys existing environments through extreme heat and toxic gases while creating fresh substrate for plant and animal colonization. Wildlife populations must adapt to constantly changing landscapes where familiar feeding and nesting areas disappear overnight. Communities near active volcanic zones adapt to living on expanding geography through specialized infrastructure planning and emergency preparedness measures. Residents develop evacuation procedures and monitoring systems that account for unpredictable volcanic hazards, while local authorities manage the challenges of providing services to areas with constantly shifting boundaries. New land formation significantly affects tourism and local economy through opportunities for development, research, and visitor attractions. Hawaii represents America's only growing state boundary, demonstrating how geological forces continue expanding national territory through natural processes. Yet while volcanic activity creates new land in the Pacific, massive water systems elsewhere in America control far more extensive boundary networks that affect millions of residents across multiple states. The lakes that control state boundaries. The Great Lakes system operates as the largest influence on American state boundaries, controlling over 4,300 miles of interstate borders through water levels that fluctuate dramatically based on precipitation, evaporation, and seasonal patterns. These 5 massive bodies of water create boundaries between 8 states, making water level changes a constant factor in determining exact jurisdictional lines. When lake levels rise or fall, the precise location of state boundaries shifts accordingly, affecting everything from property ownership to taxation authority. Changing water levels directly affect borders between multiple states through the legal principle that state boundaries follow the ordinary high water mark. Michigan's boundaries with Wisconsin, Indiana, and Ohio all depend on Lake Michigan's water levels, while Pennsylvania, New York, and Ohio share jurisdiction over Lake Erie based on its fluctuating shoreline. These water-dependent boundaries create situations where state territory can expand or contract based on seasonal weather patterns and long-term climate trends. The 2025 water level data reveals significant variations across the Great Lakes system that impact state jurisdictions in measurable ways. Lake Superior currently sits 2.1 feet above its long-term average, expanding Minnesota's and Wisconsin's territorial waters, while Lake Michigan remains 1.3 feet below average levels, reducing Michigan's boundary reach. These fluctuations translate into thousands of acres of territory shifting between states as water levels change throughout the year. Water rights disputes continue escalating between states as lake levels become increasingly unpredictable. Michigan and Ohio maintain ongoing legal battles over Lake Erie access rights, while Wisconsin and Minnesota dispute shipping channel jurisdiction on Lake Superior. These conflicts intensify during low water periods when commercial navigation becomes restricted and states compete for remaining navigable channels. Climate change affects these massive water boundaries through altered precipitation patterns, increased evaporation rates, and changing seasonal freeze-thaw cycles. Rising temperatures accelerate evaporation, while shifting weather patterns create more extreme high and low water periods that stress existing boundary agreements. These environmental changes force states to reconsider long-standing water boundary arrangements that assumed more stable lake levels. The governing of shared water resources requires unprecedented cooperation between states that must coordinate policies across multiple jurisdictions. Interstate compacts manage fishing regulations, pollution control, and water usage, but these agreements face constant pressure from changing environmental conditions. These lakes demonstrate how water possesses the ultimate power to shape political boundaries regardless of human preferences. Yet even the Great Lakes' complexity pales in comparison to boundaries that shift continuously along international borders where rivers refuse to maintain consistent courses. The river that won't stay put. The Rio Grande operates as the constantly shifting border between Texas and Mexico, creating one of the most unstable international boundaries in the world. This 1,254-mile river refuses to stay in one place, meandering across the landscape in ways that create ongoing boundary disputes and legal complications between two nations. The river's natural tendency to change course through erosion, flooding, and seasonal variations means that the international border literally moves from year to year, creating communities that wake up in different countries than where they went to sleep. River changes create persistent legal headaches through the establishment of bancos, land areas that shift from one country to another as the water finds new paths. From 1989 to 2009, the Rio Grande changed course in 128 documented locations, causing territory to transfer between the United States and Mexico without any formal agreement or negotiation. The 1970 boundary treaty between the nations established that the river's actual course would define the international boundary, but any proposed changes require mutual approval from both governments. The 2025 measurements reveal accelerating course changes driven by climate factors that intensify the river's instability. Reduced water levels and altered flow patterns create increased erosion that shifts the river's path more frequently than historical patterns. These environmental changes force border management officials to constantly monitor and respond to geographic alterations that affect property ownership, law enforcement jurisdiction, and the provision of essential services to border communities. Drought conditions and climate change affect this liquid border through reduced water flow that concentrates the river's erosive power into smaller channels. Lower water levels expose new sediment patterns while creating concentrated flow that carves fresh channels through existing riverbanks. These conditions accelerate the natural meandering process that has always characterized the Rio Grande's behavior. Communities caught between countries face extraordinary challenges as the river moves around their settlements. Property rights become questionable when homes and businesses find themselves on the opposite side of the international boundary from where they were originally built. Residents must navigate complex legal procedures to maintain their citizenship status and access to government services when geographic changes place them in different nations. Border security faces unprecedented challenges maintaining surveillance and control over a boundary that constantly relocates itself. Traditional border infrastructure becomes obsolete when the river creates new channels that bypass existing monitoring systems. Modern technology tracks river changes through satellite imagery, GPS monitoring, and geographic information systems that provide real-time data about course alterations. The Rio Grande represents the ultimate challenge of natural boundaries, demonstrating how moving water creates political divisions that shift regardless of human preferences. Yet while this river boundary moves horizontally across the landscape, other natural forces operate on a much larger scale to create invisible divisions that affect entire continental systems. The mountain range that divides a continent. The Continental Divide operates as the invisible line that determines where every drop of water in America flows, creating the most significant natural boundary on the continent. This mountainous ridge stretches from Alaska to Mexico, separating waters that flow toward the Pacific Ocean from those heading toward the Atlantic and Gulf of Mexico. The divide's path through the Rocky Mountains creates a watershed boundary that affects everything from local weather patterns to wildlife migration routes across thousands of miles of American territory. This invisible boundary influences weather systems and wildlife movement in ways that most Americans never consider. Mountain ranges along the divide create rain shadows that produce dramatically different climates on opposite sides of the same ridge. Wildlife species must navigate these elevation changes during seasonal migrations, with the divide serving as both a barrier and a corridor for animal movement patterns that have existed for millennia. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has documented significant shifts in precipitation patterns along the Continental Divide through 2025 studies that reveal increasing variability in snowfall and rainfall distribution. These changes create more frequent and intense droughts in some regions, while other areas experience increased flooding. The altered precipitation disrupts ecosystem balance, affecting water availability and forest health with consequences that extend far beyond immediate mountain communities. The divide takes unexpected turns through unique geographic features that defy simple north-south orientation. In Colorado, the divide forms a complex pattern around the San Juan Mountains, while in Montana it creates multiple branches that rejoin further north. These unusual configurations occur where ancient geological processes created mountain ranges that forced the divide to follow irregular paths through the landscape. Human settlement patterns follow the divide's influence through concentrated development in areas where the boundary creates favorable conditions for agriculture and water access. Communities position themselves to take advantage of reliable water sources while avoiding areas prone to extreme weather created by the divide's effect on regional climate patterns. The Continental Divide represents nature's most important American boundary because it controls the fundamental flow of water across the continent, influencing everything from local weather to regional economic development. Yet this massive watershed system ultimately connects to settlements that exist at the very edges of its influence, where geographic barriers create entirely different challenges for human survival. America's most isolated communities. America's most isolated settlements exist at the edges of civilization, where distance and terrain create barriers that most Americans never experience. These remote communities face extraordinary challenges simply maintaining basic existence, requiring specialized solutions for problems that urban and suburban residents take for granted. The 2020 census data reveals communities scattered across Alaska, Montana, Nevada, and other western states where populations often number in the dozens rather than thousands. Geographic isolation creates unique community challenges that affect every aspect of daily life. Residents must plan months ahead for basic necessities like medical appointments, grocery shopping, and equipment repairs. Emergency services operate under extreme limitations, with response times measured in hours rather than minutes. Weather conditions can cut off these communities for weeks at a time, forcing residents to maintain extensive stockpiles of food, fuel, and medical supplies. Population data for 2025 shows America's most isolated places maintaining small but stable communities. Towns like Supai, Arizona, accessible only by helicopter or an 8-mile hike, sustain approximately 200 residents. Remote Alaskan settlements such as Anaktuvuk Pass House, fewer than 350 people across hundreds of square miles. These communities represent the furthest reaches of American civilization, where self-sufficiency becomes a survival requirement. Accessing essential services requires extraordinary effort and expense in these remote locations. Medical care often means helicopter evacuations to distant hospitals, while basic groceries arrive by seasonal cargo flights or supply trucks that travel hundreds of miles on unpaved roads. Educational opportunities rely heavily on distance learning programs and seasonal teachers who commit to extended stays in isolated locations. Technology increasingly connects these remote communities through satellite internet, telemedicine, and online education platforms. These digital tools bridge geographical barriers by providing access to information, healthcare consultations, and educational resources that would otherwise be unavailable. Communication improvements help residents maintain connections with family members and access services from distant providers. Economic sustainability remains precarious in these isolated settlements, with limited job opportunities concentrated in natural resource industries like fishing, mining, and tourism. Transportation costs strain community budgets, while the high expense of fuel and vehicle maintenance affects every aspect of local commerce. Many communities depend on seasonal employment that provides income during brief periods of accessibility. These places represent the extremes of American geography, demonstrating human resilience in environments where distance and terrain create obstacles that test the limits of community survival. Yet even these established remote settlements face new challenges as environmental forces begin reshaping the very landscape they depend on for survival. When climate change rewrites the map, Alaska's coastline retreats at rates that cartographers struggle to track, with the Beaufort Sea consuming approximately 45 feet of territory annually between 2002 and 2007. The U.S. Geological Survey documented that erosion rates doubled between 1955 and 2007, creating the most rapid geographic transformation in recorded American history. This systematic destruction of land redefines state jurisdiction and property lines faster than legal systems can adapt to the new reality. Traditional boundary markers disappear underwater as shorelines retreat inland, creating situations where legal descriptions of property no longer match physical geography. States lose territory to rising seas while property owners watch their land vanish into the ocean, forcing cartographers to continuously update maps and boundary definitions. The rate of change now exceeds the speed at which communities can implement protective measures or legal frameworks to address disappearing geography. The 2025 measurements reveal accelerating land loss across multiple coastal regions, with Louisiana losing approximately 25 square miles annually and Florida facing similar rates of coastal retreat. These measurements translate into thousands of acres of American territory disappearing permanently, creating geographic changes that occur faster than human adaptation capabilities allow. Communities face forced relocation as their physical foundations literally disappear beneath them. Entire neighborhoods in Alaska require emergency evacuation as permafrost melts and coastal erosion destroys infrastructure. These climate refugees represent the first wave of Americans displaced by environmental changes that make their traditional homelands uninhabitable. Property ownership becomes meaningless when the land itself ceases to exist, creating unprecedented legal challenges for courts attempting to resolve disputes over disappeared territory. Wildlife habitats shift dramatically with changing geography, as coastal wetlands that serve as critical habitats for numerous species prove particularly vulnerable to these changes. Species migration patterns adapt to new geographic realities, while entire ecosystems relocate or disappear completely. These habitat changes cascade through environmental systems, affecting biodiversity across vast regions. The economic costs of geographic instability strain local and federal budgets through emergency relocations, infrastructure replacement, and legal disputes over disappeared property. Insurance systems collapse when risks become too great to calculate, while tourism-dependent communities lose their geographic attractions to rising seas. Communities adapt through elevated construction and managed retreat strategies, but these solutions merely delay inevitable geographic transformation. Climate change operates at speeds that permanently alter the physical foundation of American territory, yet even these dramatic environmental shifts pale in comparison to the administrative chaos created by boundaries drawn without consideration for practical governance. The most confusing county lines in America. County boundaries across America create administrative nightmares that would make any government official question the sanity of their predecessors. These jurisdictional puzzles exist because historical accidents, surveying errors, and political compromises created boundary lines that defy logic and common sense. The result is a patchwork of counties that force residents to navigate multiple governments for basic services, while creating economic headaches that persist centuries after the original mistakes. Kentucky's Fulton County operates partially in Kentucky and partially in Tennessee, creating situations where residents vote in different states depending on which side of the street they live on. Virginia's Fairfax County maintains an exclave that requires residents to travel through other counties to access their own government services. These arrangements force residents to cross state lines just to reach their own county seat, creating daily complications that most Americans never experience. Residents navigate services across multiple jurisdictions through a complex system of agreements and workarounds that would confuse even experienced bureaucrats. Emergency services operate under mutual aid agreements that require constant coordination between different departments with different protocols. School districts create transportation routes that cross county lines multiple times during single bus routes, while library systems maintain reciprocal agreements that allow residents to use facilities in counties they don't technically belong to. The economic costs of maintaining these complex boundaries strain local budgets through duplicated services and administrative overhead. Counties must maintain separate offices, staff, and infrastructure to serve populations that could be more efficiently managed under simplified boundaries. The need for multiple sets of emergency services, road maintenance crews, and administrative systems creates expenses that smaller communities struggle to afford. Emergency services and law enforcement face particular challenges when county boundaries create jurisdictional confusion. Police officers must understand which laws apply in different areas of their patrol routes, while ambulance services coordinate with multiple hospitals and fire departments across boundary lines. Response times increase when emergency personnel must navigate complex jurisdictional protocols during critical situations. Modern technology helps manage complex jurisdictions through GPS systems and geographic information databases that track service boundaries and jurisdictional authority. These tools allow emergency dispatchers to quickly identify which agencies have responsibility for specific locations, while helping administrators coordinate services across multiple counties. These boundaries represent the legacy of hasty territorial organization that prioritized political expediency over practical governance. Yet even county-level confusion seems straightforward compared to territories that find themselves belonging to entirely unexpected states through geographic accidents that scattered pieces of America across the map. Islands in the wrong state. American islands scattered across the country belong to states that would surprise most geography enthusiasts, creating territorial puzzles that defy logical expectations. These geographic anomalies emerged from historical accidents, surveying mistakes, and political compromises that placed islands under the jurisdiction of distant states rather than their obvious neighbors. The resulting situations force residents to navigate unusual state affiliations that affect everything from voting procedures to emergency services. Ellis Island demonstrates how artificial land expansion can create split jurisdictions between states. The original portion of this historic immigration gateway belongs to New York, while sections created through artificial infill fall under New Jersey's control. This division resulted from a 1998 Supreme Court ruling that settled decades of dispute between the two states. Visitors exploring the museum unknowingly cross state lines as they move between different sections of the facility. River changes and surveying errors created these geographic anomalies through natural disasters and map-making mistakes that occurred centuries ago. The 1811 to 1812 New Madrid earthquakes reshaped the Mississippi River, solidifying the Kentucky Bend's status as an exclave surrounded by Missouri and Tennessee. These seismic events permanently altered waterways that originally defined state boundaries, creating isolated territories that belonged to states they could no longer reach directly. Delaware maintains control over artificial islands created by dredging operations in the Delaware River, despite these land masses sitting adjacent to New Jersey shores. 3 Supreme Court cases have upheld Delaware's claims to these engineered territories, establishing precedents for artificial land ownership that continue generating legal challenges and jurisdictional confusion. Residents of these islands navigate their unusual state affiliations through complex arrangements that require crossing multiple jurisdictions for basic services. Citizens living on these disconnected territories must travel through other states to reach their own state capitals, courthouses, and government offices. This geographic isolation creates unique challenges for accessing state-specific services and participating in political processes. These islands maintain connections to their parent states through ferry services, specialized transportation agreements, and communication systems that bridge geographic gaps. Emergency services operate under mutual aid agreements that coordinate responses across state boundaries, while administrative costs strain local budgets through duplicated services and specialized transportation arrangements. These anomalies affect everything from tax collection to voting procedures, creating administrative challenges that demonstrate how historical accidents continue shaping modern governance. Yet even these island jurisdictions seem straightforward compared to boundaries that ignore natural geography entirely in favor of political convenience. When time zones ignore geography. Time zone boundaries create geographic confusion across America through political decisions that completely ignore natural features and logical geographic divisions. These arbitrary lines force communities to operate under time systems that defy common sense, creating situations where neighboring towns exist in different time zones despite sharing identical longitude coordinates. The result is a patchwork of temporal territories that prioritize political convenience over geographic reality. Political decisions override geographic logic in time zone placement through legislative actions that respond to economic pressures rather than solar positioning. States lobby to change their time zone affiliations to align with major business centers, while communities petition for adjustments that benefit their commercial interests. These political manipulations create jagged time zone boundaries that zigzag across states in patterns that would confuse any reasonable observer. The 2025 examples of communities split by time zone boundaries include Gulf County, Florida, where residents experience the surreal reality of living in both central and eastern time zones simultaneously. This division forces families to navigate different time systems for work, school, and social activities within the same county. Similar situations exist in Kentucky, Indiana, and other states where time zone boundaries slice through communities without regard for local unity. Residents cope with living in multiple time zones through elaborate scheduling systems and constant mental calculations that complicate daily life. Business meetings require careful coordination to avoid confusion about start times, while families must remember which time zone their relatives operate under. These temporal juggling acts become second nature for people living in time zone border regions. The economic impact of time zone placement affects communities through reduced business efficiency and increased coordination costs. Companies operating across time zone boundaries must maintain multiple scheduling systems while coordinating employee shifts that span different temporal territories. Television stations face particular challenges broadcasting to audiences in different time zones within the same viewing area. The Diomede Islands exemplify this absurdity, with Big Diomede and Little Diomede sitting just 2.5 miles apart, yet existing in entirely different time zones due to international boundaries that ignore geographic proximity. Time zones represent the triumph of politics over geography, demonstrating how arbitrary political decisions can override natural solar patterns. These temporal boundaries create coordination challenges that ripple through multiple industries, but they pale in comparison to the physical extremes that exist within America's own borders. Extreme heights and depths across America. America's elevation extremes create worlds within worlds, where individual states contain height differences so dramatic that they generate entirely different climates, economies, and ways of life within the same political boundaries. California exemplifies this geographic diversity, spanning from Death Valley's Badwater Basin at 282 feet below sea level to Mount Whitney's Peak at 14,505 feet above sea level. This 14,787-foot difference occurs within a single state, creating climatic conditions that range from desert heat to alpine cold across just 200 miles of territory. States containing both mountains and valleys with extreme elevation changes face unique governance challenges that most Americans never consider. Colorado manages territories that span from 3,317 feet along the Arkansas River to 14,440 feet at Mount Elbert's summit. These elevation differences create distinct economic zones where agricultural practices, building codes, and infrastructure requirements vary dramatically based on altitude and climate conditions. The 2025 measurements of highest and lowest points in each state reveal surprising contrasts that challenge geographic assumptions. Florida's elevation range spans only 345 feet from sea level to Britton Hill, while Wyoming varies by over 11,000 feet from its lowest point along the Belfourche River to Gannett Peak. These measurements demonstrate how geological forces created vastly different landscapes within arbitrary political boundaries. Governing territories with extreme elevation differences requires specialized approaches to infrastructure, emergency services, and resource management. Mountain communities operate under building codes designed for snow loads and seismic activity, while valley settlements focus on flood control and heat management. Transportation departments must maintain roads that function at sea level and at elevations exceeding 10,000 feet. Geographic features creating these extreme variations include mountain ranges formed by tectonic forces, valleys carved by glacial activity, and basins created by geological subsidence. The Rocky Mountains contribute to dramatic elevation changes across multiple states, while ancient geological processes created the deep valleys and high peaks that define regional landscapes. Communities existing at America's geographic extremes develop unique adaptations for survival and prosperity. High-altitude settlements like Leadville, Colorado, create specialized economies around mining and tourism, while low-elevation communities focus on agriculture and manufacturing. These elevation extremes showcase how topographic variation creates distinct regional identities, yet altitude represents just one factor in determining economic opportunity across America's diverse geography. Landlocked states with ocean connections. Economic opportunity flows through unexpected channels, and landlocked states across America maintain surprising connections to the sea through an intricate network of rivers and shipping channels that transform interior regions into maritime gateways. States like Missouri, Illinois, and Minnesota access global markets through waterways that flow thousands of miles from their borders to oceanic ports. These inland water routes create economic lifelines that allow landlocked territories to participate in international trade as effectively as coastal states. The Mississippi, Missouri, and Ohio rivers serve as crucial arteries connecting interior states to oceans through a vast network that enables global commerce. The Mississippi River alone flows 2,350 miles from Minnesota to the Gulf of Mexico, creating a direct maritime connection between the upper Midwest and international shipping lanes. This system enables landlocked states to import raw materials and export finished products without depending on overland transportation to coastal ports. Barges transport approximately 175 million tons of freight annually on the upper Mississippi via a system of 29 locks and dams, demonstrating the massive scale of commerce flowing through these inland routes. This transportation system supports industries across multiple landlocked states while maintaining cost advantages that keep American goods competitive in international markets. The 29 locks and dams represent engineering marvels that enable commercial navigation across varying elevations and seasonal water conditions. These waterways support industries, create jobs, and contribute to the overall economic output of landlocked states, making them crucial for maintaining competitiveness in the global market. Agricultural products, coal, and manufactured goods flow through these systems, supporting entire regional economies that depend on efficient water transportation. River towns along major waterways maintain ports, shipping facilities, and supporting industries that exist solely because of these connections to distant oceans. Climate change increasingly threatens these crucial water connections through fluctuating water levels and extreme weather patterns. Changes in precipitation patterns and more frequent extreme weather events can lead to both droughts and floods, making it difficult to maintain consistent navigation. These environmental challenges threaten the reliability of water transportation systems that landlocked states depend on for economic survival. These water routes prove that geography doesn't determine economic destiny, as landlocked states successfully compete in global markets through creative use of natural systems. Yet while these states overcome geographic barriers through waterways, other communities face entirely different challenges when political boundaries slice directly through their neighborhoods. Cities split by state lines. Cities that exist in multiple states simultaneously create some of America's most complex governance situations, where invisible lines divide communities that share everything from post offices to cultural identities. These divided municipalities force residents to navigate different legal systems, tax codes, and government services while maintaining unified community bonds that transcend political boundaries. Texarkana exemplifies these complexities as it straddles the Texas-Arkansas border, creating a metropolitan area where residents literally live in two states at once. In 2025, the city continues to share a post office and courthouse, reflecting its deep economic and cultural ties. This arrangement, while convenient in some ways, necessitates constant collaboration between the two states to ensure effective service delivery and minimize burdens on residents navigating the bi-state environment. Bristol represents another prime example of dual municipality dynamics, split between Virginia and Tennessee yet maintaining a shared culture and identity. Despite the invisible line separating the two halves, the city maintains unified community bonds that help residents overcome the challenges of divided governance. This shared identity fosters cooperation and collaboration essential for managing daily life across state boundaries. Residents of multi-state cities face the daily reality of navigating differing state laws and regulations in 2025, impacting taxation, property rights, law enforcement, and emergency services. These legal complexities create confusion and frustration as individuals encounter different rules depending on their location within the same community. The administrative burden affects everything from business licensing to voting. Procedures. Law enforcement faces unique challenges as state lines complicate investigations and jurisdictional issues. Coordination between police, fire departments, and emergency medical services requires constant communication, but different protocols, communication systems, and funding models create obstacles. These challenges can impact response times and effectiveness of public safety efforts, highlighting the need for standardized procedures and interagency collaboration. The economic implications of multi-state taxation and regulation remain significant for businesses and residents. Companies operating in these cities must comply with tax laws of multiple states, increasing administrative burdens and costs. Residents face different tax rates and regulations, affecting their financial planning and decisions, while creating uneven playing fields that require careful financial management. These cities represent the power of community over political boundaries, because residents find ways to cooperate and build shared identities despite legal and logistical challenges. Yet while urban communities work to overcome artificial divisions, natural systems operate on entirely different scales that ignore human boundaries altogether. Natural features that cross multiple states. Geographic features that span multiple state boundaries create some of America's most complex management situations, where natural landmarks refuse to respect political lines drawn by humans centuries ago. Mountain ranges, river systems, forests, and other natural formations cross state borders without regard for jurisdictional authority, forcing governments to develop innovative cooperation strategies. These shared landscapes require coordination between multiple states that often have different priorities, budgets, and regulatory approaches. The Appalachian Mountains exemplify these management challenges as they stretch across 18 states from Georgia to Maine, creating a continuous ecosystem that requires coordinated conservation efforts. The Great Lakes system spans 8 states and 2 countries, making water quality management and shipping regulations extraordinarily complex. Yellowstone National Park extends across Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho, requiring these states to coordinate wildlife management, tourism policies, and environmental protection measures. The 2025 examples of significant multi-state geographic features include the Colorado River system, which flows through 7 states and requires constant negotiation over water allocation rights. The Mississippi River touches 10 states along its 2,350-mile journey, creating shipping corridors that demand unified navigation standards. The Rocky Mountains extend across multiple states, each managing different portions of the same geological formation under varying environmental regulations. States coordinate management of shared resources through interstate compacts and federal oversight programs that establish common standards and dispute resolution mechanisms. The Colorado River Compact demonstrates how states negotiate water-sharing agreements, while the Great Lakes Compact shows how multiple jurisdictions can cooperate on environmental protection. These agreements require constant renegotiation as environmental conditions change and state priorities evolve. Environmental challenges of managing shared landscapes intensify as climate change affects ecosystems that span multiple jurisdictions. Wildlife migration patterns cross state boundaries, requiring coordinated habitat protection efforts. Water quality issues in one state affect downstream neighbors, making pollution control a multi-state responsibility. Tourism and recreation management across state lines requires unified marketing strategies and standardized safety protocols. National parks that span multiple states coordinate visitor services, while multi-state trail systems require consistent maintenance standards. These recreational resources generate economic benefits that must be shared equitably among participating states. Interstate cooperation becomes essential for effective management because natural features operate as unified systems regardless of political boundaries. These shared natural systems demonstrate how geographic reality often overwhelms human attempts to create orderly divisions. Yet the ultimate test of geographic extremes occurs in places where nature itself creates barriers so formidable that human presence becomes a constant struggle against isolation. The most remote places in America. America's most remote locations represent the furthest reaches of human civilization, where vast distances and harsh terrain create isolation that most Americans cannot imagine. These places exist at the edges of the continental United States, where roads end and communication systems struggle to function. The settlements that survive in these extreme environments demonstrate remarkable human adaptability and determination to maintain communities despite overwhelming geographic challenges. Distance and terrain create extreme isolation through combinations of mountain ranges, deserts, and waterways that act as natural barriers to outside contact. Remote valleys in Montana and Idaho remain accessible only through seasonal roads that close for months during winter storms. Desert communities in Nevada and Utah sit hundreds of miles from the nearest hospital or grocery store, while mountain settlements in Colorado and Wyoming face elevation changes that make travel dangerous and expensive. The 2025 measurements of America's most remote accessible locations reveal communities that exist more than 200 miles from major population centers. Towns like Gerlach, Nevada, and Supai, Arizona, maintain populations despite sitting at extraordinary distances from essential services. These measurements account for actual travel time rather than straight-line distances, since mountain passes and seasonal road closures affect accessibility more than simple mileage calculations. Communities and individuals who inhabit these distant places develop remarkable self-sufficiency skills and strong social bonds that help them survive extended periods without outside assistance. Residents stockpile supplies for months at a time, maintain extensive medical kits, and learn multiple practical skills that urban Americans rely on specialists to provide. These communities often maintain strong social bonds, close-knit families, and deep connections to the land that help preserve their cultural heritage. Remote locations maintain connections to the outside world through satellite internet, radio communications, and seasonal transportation services that provide lifelines during extended isolation periods. The adoption of technologies like satellite internet, telemedicine, and remote learning platforms helps bridge the gap between these communities and the outside world, providing access to information, education, and healthcare that was previously unavailable. Providing services to remote areas requires innovative solutions, including air ambulances, supply drops, and specialized personnel willing to work in isolated conditions. High costs of living, limited job opportunities, and the need for self-sufficiency create financial strain, while social isolation and limited access to healthcare take tolls on residents' well-being. These remote places represent the true scale of American geography by showcasing the diversity and vastness of the country, while highlighting the resilience of human communities that adapt to extraordinary circumstances through ingenuity and determination. These geographic mysteries scattered across America's landscape reveal how historical accidents, natural forces, and human decisions created the complex puzzle that defines the nation's boundaries today. From Minnesota's passport-required territory to Hawaii's growing landmass, these anomalies demonstrate that the United States contains far more surprises than most people realize. Rivers that ignore state boundaries, circular borders drawn by colonial kings, and towns that exist in the wrong states all prove that geography refuses to follow human logic. These places challenge fundamental assumptions about American boundaries and borders, showing that the nation's 3.794 million square miles hold mysteries worth exploring. Each oddity tells a story about the forces that shaped America, whether through surveying errors, natural disasters, or political compromises that seemed reasonable at the time but created lasting geographic confusion. Understanding these anomalies provides insight into how the seemingly orderly map of America actually emerged from centuries of geographic chaos, human ambition, and nature's refusal to respect artificial boundaries.